Good afternoon, and welcome to our TV show featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at mythsandrealities.com. In episode 43, we have learned that Professor Justin McCarthy had discovered in the U.S. National Archives in 1990 a survey of Eastern Anatolia conducted in the summer of 1919 by two Americans, Captain Emory H. Niles and Mr. Arthur E. Sutherland Jr. The significance of this is that their account is one of the first descriptions of this region by outside observers after the First World War. The document was missing, however, the author's field notes, which the author specifically stated should be read in conjunction with their report. Some 20 years after that momentous discovery, Niles and Sutherland's field notes have been found in the archives of the former American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, or ABCFM for short, in Istanbul, by another American historian, Brian Johnson. In episodes 44 and 45, I covered Johnson's research work titled Americans Investigating Anatolia, the 1919 field notes of Emory Niles and Arthur Sutherland, published in peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Turkish Studies, 34/2010. A PDF version is available on the internet. Between 14th of July and 12th of August 1919, Niles and Sutherland, employees of aid organization called the American Committee for Relief in the Near East, or Near East Relief for short, traveled from Mardin to Trabzon by way of Bitlis, Van, and Erzurum, visiting 23 cities to determine their relief needs of the locals and how the Near East relief could fulfill them. Their report was somehow mixed in with various papers related to the Major General James G. Harbord Commission, a survey expedition sent by President Wilson to Anatolia and to South Caucasus in September 1919 to investigate the feasibility for an American mandate over the region and the establishment of an Armenian state that would include most of eastern Turkey. Harbord and some U.S. military officers traveled from Mardin to Tiflis, but took a different route than Niles and Sutherland. And Harbord relied in his report on Niles and Sutherland observations of Bitlis and Van. Harbord, however, distorted their findings by implying that they were similar to his findings, which they were absolutely not. Since the American Protestant missionary activity in the late Ottoman Empire was quite extensive, discovery of Niles and Sutherland's field notes in the missionary archives of Istanbul should not come as a surprise. For the same reason, the inclusion of their report in the Harbord Commission papers is also plausible. The ABCFM, a Protestant mission agency founded in 1810 to spread Protestant teachings worldwide, first appeared in Anatolia in 1820. Finding Muslims inaccessible, the missionaries turned their attention to Christians of the Eastern churches. By the 1850s, the ABCFM had already built an extensive network of schools and hospitals. The outbreak of World War I interrupted missionary activities abruptly, although the U.S. did not enter the First World War for almost 3 years. It did not help that the Armenians, in whom the missionaries invested most, deserted from the Ottoman army when the Ottoman Empire was fighting for its survival against multiple foreign attacks. To make matters worse, they joined the invading enemy armies of the Tsarist Russia. To add insult to injury, the Armenian turncoats waged massive armed rebellions in Eastern Anatolia, tying up Ottoman soldiers desperately needed at other fronts. Here's what the Macmillan Dictionary of the First World War by Pope Wheal, published in London in 1997, says on page 34, I quote, "Armenian nationalists invaded Eastern Anatolia in December and slaughtered an estimated 120,000 non-Armenians while the Turkish army was preoccupied with mobilization and the Caucasian front offensive towards Sarıkamış." Unquote. Armenian insurgents killed another 80,000 Muslims during the Van Rebellion in April-May of 1915. Ethnically cleansing the entire area of its Muslims. The two casualty numbers alone add up to 200,000 Muslim dead, representing about 2% of the Ottoman Muslims. Question: what would America do if a domestic insurgent group took up arms against American government and killed 2% of Americans, which would be about 6.6 million citizens in about 6 months? Would America stop at temporarily resettling the insurgents' logistic base like the Ottomans did in 1915? Or would a Waco, Texas, or even Nagasaki on the table? Think about it. Consider that the US waged a global war because 3,000 Americans were killed on 9/11. Nowhere near 6.6 million we're talking about, and spent $5.8 trillion, according to Brown University researchers, on the war in Afghanistan and other related conflicts, killing more than 1 million Muslims, mostly non-combatant civilians. Food for thought. The American Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief, established by missionaries and some American philanthropists to assist Armenians, painted in its report the entire Muslim populace as marginal, misguided, and tyrannical. The US politicians and media accepted all such cliched, simplistic, and venomous reports uncritically, as the embellished stories suited well the prevailing bias and popular perceptions. Prejudice fueled perceptions, and perceptions ignited more prejudice. This toxic cycle went on unchecked for decades, to even today. Meanwhile, Niles and Sutherland Report was shunned because it was against the popularly held belief, buried in other reports, hid from the public eye, and eventually forgotten. During the First World War, American missionaries were major informants about events in Anatolia. Their bigoted accounts remain a key source for the history of this area and still accepted at face value uncritically. They ignored that the Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire had enjoyed during the entire 6 centuries of Ottoman reign a degree of religious freedom that was not accorded to Muslims and Jews of Europe or even some Christian sects. The missionaries dismissed the many seditious and violent activities of Armenian Revolutionary Federation and other vicious Armenian groups, which caused the Ottoman government to lose trust in Armenians. The missionaries failed to point out that many of the Armenians had betrayed their own government during a war of survival, or that Muslim Turks were suffering even more greatly due to same wartime conditions. Niles and Sutherland returned to Istanbul mid-August 1919, completed their term of duty, and left Turkey within a few days. Their field notes and report were submitted to the administrators of the Near East Relief in Turkey. This explains how the notes emerged from the American Board Archives in Istanbul as William Peet, ABCFM business agent and treasurer, was also a member of the Near East Relief. This also suggests how their report might have found its way into the papers of the Harbord Commission, as Barton and Harbord met to plot Harbord's expedition route. Niles and Sutherland recorded human and material losses, interviewed local officials and inhabitants, and estimated the need for humanitarian aid. They saw some devastated villages as well as half-destroyed ones with their few inhabitants in miserable condition. Roads and bridges were in poor condition. All of this in the Muslim areas. World War I had indeed taken a heavy toll on all the peoples of Eastern Anatolia, not just the Armenians, as the American public was relentlessly misinformed by the missionaries, politicians, and press. In May of 1915, Van was ethnically cleansed of its Muslims by Armenians and turned over to the invading Russian army. Russians and Armenians occupied Van, along with much of Eastern Anatolia, until 1917, when the revolution started in Russia and the Russian army left. This is when Armenian atrocities victimizing defenseless Muslims peaked and lasted from 1917 to 1918. The Ottomans launched a counter-offensive in early 1918. No match for the disciplined Turkish army, the Armenians quickly retreated eastward towards the Caucasus, while at the same time the Muslims of the Caucasus moved westward into Ottoman territory to escape persecution by Armenians. It is interesting to note that we always hear much about Armenian suffering, but nothing about Muslim suffering, although both of these tragic events happened at the same time, in the same geography, and due to the same wartime conditions. Niles and Sutherland's report was a breath of fresh air in the orthodox historiography of the alleged Armenian genocide. Here is what they said, quoting Johnson. The Muslim quarter in Bitlis was in total ruin, with an estimated 6,500 homes lost. Mosques, shops, public buildings, and bridges had also been wrecked. In the Armenian area, about 500 dwellings out of 1,500 had been destroyed. The same general conditions were evident throughout the region, especially in territory that had been under Russian and Armenian control, unquote. In the province of Van, for example, Niles and Sutherland estimated that 150,000 Muslims from a pre-war population of 301,000 remained. Half was gone, killed. Lesser damage observed in Armenian villages and city quarters compelled Niles and Sutherland to reassess the frequent accounts of Armenian atrocities victimizing Muslims. They doubted these stories at first, which contradicted the popular perception of all Armenians being innocent, angelic victims and all Turks as evil, brutal victimizers. Niles and Sutherland heard shocking stories where the Armenians were accused of having committed murder, rape, arson, torture, and other horrible atrocities of every description upon the Muslim population. They stated in their final report how their observations in the field supported these accounts of unspeakable Armenian brutality and persecution of innocent Muslims. Missionary accounts and the US press heavily publicized a stereotypical view shaping the American public opinion about events in Anatolia before, during, and after the First World War. Niles and Sutherland's findings contradicted this outlook. Near East Relief and ABCFM leaders, mostly missionaries, and their supporters in politics and media all wanted an Armenian settlement in Turkey leading to an independent state in the East. Niles and Sutherland's observations cast serious doubt on this unrealistic plan. Niles and Sutherland's service contracts with Near East Relief ended in August 1919, and they were released within days of returning to Istanbul. No public mention of their mission exists. Niles and Sutherland's field notes and report document an investigation by observers who valued impartiality. The details Niles and Sutherland uncovered should contribute to scholarly understanding of Anatolia during and after the First World War. A rare and objective analysis, unappreciated at the time, is so significant that no work on the Turkish-Armenian conflict can be considered scholarly or thorough without studying it. Professor McCarthy, in his 1995 book, Death in Exile, The Ethnic Cleansing of Ottoman Muslims, 1821-1922, comments, and I quote, "Despite their prejudices, Niles and Sutherland reported evils perpetrated by Armenians," unquote. Since the findings of Niles and Sutherland are so obscure, one must wonder why it has been so ignored. And why has the Harvard report misrepresented what Niles had written? Professor McCarthy speculates, I quote, "One cannot help but believe that their evidence was not what those in power wished to hear," unquote. Note number 70 in Johnson's paper is about the English translation of a telegram in French, which gives an insight into the brutality of the Armenians in Eastern Anatolia during World War I. I quote, "Muslim refugees in Bayazid report cruelties and massacres organized by Armenian troops in the region of Sürmeli, Ovyezidi, Nakhchivan, Sheril, Ordupat, Yerevan province. Urgently demand investigation and provision of protection," unquote. The third paragraph on page 13 of Johnson's paper reveals the destitute of the Turks. I quote, "Niles and Sutherland summarized their observations about Zidikan and other parts of Erzurum province in their final report to the Near East Relief. They reiterated that famine was inevitable during the coming months and that without outside food supplies, the region's inhabitants would suffer and die. Based on their assessment, they recommended that the aid organization provide the province with food relief on a large scale and distribution in the towns and villages, especially Diyadin, Karakilise, Zeydakan, Hasankale, and Alashkirt," unquote. The Near East Relief would cruelly reject this heartfelt call for help because they write, and I quote, "There's no Christian there," unquote. This is how the missionaries saw the world: Christians and Muslims, us and them, Christian good, Muslim bad. The relief provided was sectarian, not humanitarian. This is how the missionaries wrote those reports to the US politicians and media and others, demonizing all Muslims. And this excerpt from page 15 of Johnson's paper reveals more about the atrocities Armenians committed. I quote, "Niles and Sutherland explained in their final report how their observations in the field reshaped their views. In this entire region, we were informed that The damage and destruction had been done by Armenians who, after the Russians retired, remained in occupation of the country, and who, when the Turkish army advanced, destroyed everything belonging to the Muslims. Moreover, the Armenians are accused of having committed murder, rape, arson, and horrible atrocities of every description upon the Muslim population. At first, we were incredulous of these stories, but we finally came to believe them, since the testimony was absolutely unanimous and was corroborated by material evidence. For instance, the only quarters left at all intact in the cities of Bitlis and Van are the Armenian quarters, as was evidenced by churches and inscriptions on the houses, while the Muslim quarters were completely destroyed. At every town and village at which we stopped, the inhabitants' first desire was to tell us not of their needs, but of horrors which the Armenians had committed upon them and their families, the details of which were almost exactly the same as those perpetrated by the Turks upon the Armenians. We believe that it is incontestable that the Armenians were guilty of crimes of the same nature against the Turks as those of which the Turks are guilty against the Armenians. Unquote. Now, let's read Johnson's conclusions. I quote, "No contemporary public mention of their mission seems to exist except for the brief note by Harvard. Their observations and assessments were buried in the archives of the US government and the ABCFM, where they remained forgotten until the emergence of the report in 1990 and the field notes in 2010. Full understanding of Niles and Sutherland's final report and its historical importance depends on examining it together with their field notes. Besides providing eyewitness information about Eastern Anatolia following the First World War, they supplement appraisals of current conditions, as well as events in the recent past. Finally, the notes and reports combined offer further insight into the efforts and approach of the American Committee for Near East Relief in pursuing humanitarian work in Turkey after the war. Niles and Sutherland's field notes and report document an investigation by observers who valued impartiality. The two men surveyed extensive territory, interviewed local informants, and compared and evaluated information from multiple sources. The details they uncovered should contribute greatly to scholarly understanding of Anatolia. Historians and others who hope to better comprehend the events of the past will certainly benefit from Emory Niles and Arthur Sutherland's data and estimates. But they will perhaps profit most by implementing a similar method of inquiry." Unquote. This completes the series on the Niles and Sutherland report and the accompanying notes. Next week, I will focus on Barton and King Crane reports of their 1919 exploratory travels in the Ottoman Empire. Let the plain truth lead the way to a civilized dialogue, closure, and peace. Thank you for joining me, and see you next week.